What's going on, everybody? Kalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A14 4G and the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. So basically comparing one of Samsung's lowest end phones to a relatively higher end device. Essentially, the purpose of this comparison is to give you an idea of what you might be missing if you decide to go the more affordable route and get something like the Samsung Galaxy A14 versus spending a bit more money and getting something higher end like the S21 FE. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A14, we're getting a 6.6-inch PLS LCD display with the 1080p resolution, a PPI of 400, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. With the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting a 6.4-inch 120Hz dynamic AMOLED display with the 1080p resolution, a PPI of 411, and a 19.5:9 aspect ratio. So in general, both phones here actually have pretty good displays. You might expect the lower end phone to have like a 720p resolution and honestly just really not very good image quality, but surprisingly, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, things actually do look pretty good. And in addition to this, I was surprised to see the brightness is pretty similar. Although keep in mind with the dynamic AMOLED, first of all, the colors are going to be a little bit more vibrant and the viewing angles are quite a bit better. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, or really in any kind of bright outdoor setting, the S21 FE will be quite a bit easier to see. And with the 120Hz refresh rate versus a standard 60Hz with the A14, the movement on the screen with the S21 FE is going to be a bit faster and smoother, making the phone feel a bit more premium. But honestly, I feel like when it comes to overall image quality and the general experience you're gonna get, if you're doing stuff like watching videos, for example, where you do want a really nice looking image, you're really not gonna go wrong with the A14. Sure, in some kinda more subtle ways, the S21 FE will still be technically better when it comes to image quality. But first of all, at 6.6 inches versus 6.4, the A14 is actually a bit larger. And second of all, again, the image quality with this phone is still really good. So unless you're really gonna be like outside a lot, when it comes to the display, you're really gonna get around the same kind of experience with either phone here. Now for storage, both phones here have 128GB of internal storage, but keep in mind with the A14, this phone does have microSD card expansion, whereas unfortunately with the S21 FE, this phone does not. Now, on one hand, I feel like for the average user, 128GB is going to be plenty of space anyway, so most people probably won't really need a microSD card, but at the same time, maybe your current phone does have a microSD card. In that case, transferring things onto a phone that can't take a microSD card might be a little inconvenient, but in general, again, I feel like with 128GB, either phone here will be perfectly fine. That being said though, a couple things I do want to point out. First of all, with the A14, this phone in my hand is the unlocked international version, which as of this recording is the only version of this phone I know of. So if this phone does make it to a US carrier, the storage might be different. And considering the A14 5G has only 64GB, I don't imagine a US carrier is going to give it actually 128. So just be aware if you are watching this maybe a few months after this recording, you might be looking at a US version that has only 64, so just be aware that is a possibility, but as of right now, the only version of this phone I know of does have 128GB. In addition to this, with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, this phone does have another variant that has 256GB. So if you really want more storage on this phone, even though it doesn't have microSD card expansion, you can get a lot more internal storage. But either way, I feel like for the average user, if you do want a phone that has a good amount of storage, you really won't go wrong with either one here. For security features, both phones have Face Unlock, and they both have fingerprint scanners too. With the Samsung Galaxy A14, it's right here on the power key, and with the S21 FE, it's in the display. But starting with the A14, let's give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the S21 FE. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, both fingerprint scanners were real fast and responsive. And again, remember, both phones have Face Unlock too, so definitely nice to get both options. Taking a look at the camera setups, with the A14, up front, we got a 13 megapixel selfie camera, then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. For video, this phone has a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K here. But considering this is pretty much Samsung's lowest end phone, or second lowest end I guess, I'm really not surprised. With the S21 FE, up front, we got a 32 megapixel selfie camera, then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 12 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel telephoto lens, and a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. And then for video, this phone can record in 4K in both the rear and front cameras, so definitely great to see. So in general, when it comes to features, they're actually pretty similar. On one hand, the A14 does have a macro camera, and the S21 FE has a telephoto lens, but aside from that, they both have ultra-wide cameras, which in the case of the A14, considering this is a lower end device, it is nice that we're getting a decent amount of features here. But in general, I feel like comparing a macro camera to a telephoto lens, the telephoto lens in general is quite a bit more useful. And overall, when it comes to photo quality, this is probably not surprising, but with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, it will be on a completely different level. Keep in mind, despite having 12 megapixels versus 50 with the A14, the hardware in the camera with the S21 FE is quite a bit higher quality. So with this phone, the photo quality will be significantly better. To give you an idea of what they can do, first, here's some pictures taken with the Samsung Galaxy A14. So overall, I feel like for what it is, the photo quality is at least decent, and for the average casual user, this might end up being all you really need. I mean, overall, the photos are definitely not bad, so if you're using something like Snapchat, for example, maybe you're taking photos to send to friends and family, or maybe vacation photos for your own memories, and even something like an occasional Instagram post every now and then, I feel like if you're really not taking pictures all the time, and you're really after just a decent camera for when you need it, the Samsung Galaxy A14, while obviously not being the best camera ever, is still probably going to be at least good enough. And then here's some pictures taken with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. Now, obviously, just considering the price difference, the camera here is on a completely different level, but again, keep in mind, if you're really not going to be using your camera that much, you probably don't need something this high-end. Sure, for something like Instagram, it is nice to have, but I've seen plenty of really nice Instagram photos taken with much lower-end cameras than this. So in general, it really just depends on your usage. If the camera is really a priority for you, then obviously you can probably justify spending a bit more and getting something like the S21 FE. But again, if you're really not going to be using your camera that much, then the A14 5G does get the job done. So in that case, for more of a light casual user, that might be a better choice for you. Now for the RAM and processor, with the Samsung Galaxy A14, we're getting 4GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio G80 processor. With the S21 FE, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the Qualcomm Snapdragon 888 5G processor. In addition to this, there is another version of this phone, I believe it's the international version, so the global non-US version, and I believe that one has the Exynos 2100. To be perfectly honest, I don't really know a whole lot about that processor, and the phone in this video does have the Snapdragon, but in general, either way, you probably already knew before you even watched this video. As a much higher end device, the S21 FE will have significantly better performance. So overall, if you're going to be on your phone a lot doing more demanding activities, maybe you're doing high performance mobile gaming, video editing, stuff like that, or again, you're really just going to be on your phone a lot, in that case, you will get a much better experience with the S21 FE, and I mean, this is really a pretty significant difference. On the other hand though, with the A14, I feel like for what it is, the performance we get with this phone is really not terrible. On one hand, it's definitely not very fast, but on the other hand, for really basic stuff like the occasional Google search every now and then, watching YouTube videos, listening to music, and maybe some really light mobile gaming stuff like Angry Birds and these really simple kind of games, it will definitely get the job done. And if you're not going to be on your phone a lot, if you're really not doing stuff that requires a lot of processing power, sure, even for basic things, the S21 FE will be a bit faster, but in that case where you're really not doing a lot with your phone, getting a device like this really might not be worth it. So in that case where you're really using your phone for more basic activities and not a whole lot else, I would personally say the A14 will get the job done. But of course, if you want the faster device between the two, then without a doubt, the S21 FE will be significantly better. Now to give you an idea of how big this difference really is, I ran a benchmark test on each phone here using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So again, as you can see, the S21 FE is significantly faster. I mean, the single core score here is higher than the A14's multi-core score, so not that this is any kind of surprise at all, but just keep in mind if you do really care about performance, you might want to think about spending a bit more and getting the S21 FE, but if you're really not using your phone for that much, then again, I personally wouldn't waste the money, because with the A14, despite not being very fast in general, if you're really only using your phone for basic activities anyway, it will be just fine. Now when it comes to the battery, the Samsung Galaxy A14 actually has an advantage here. With this phone, we're getting a 5000 mAh battery. This supports 15 watt fast charging, and with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, we're getting a 4500 mAh battery that supports 25 watt fast charging and wireless charging too. So in general, when it comes to charging, the S21 FE is a bit better, definitely more premium here, but I feel like overall, the battery life with the A14 is noticeably better. With the S21 FE, it's not necessarily terrible, but at the same time, if you're really using your phone a lot, lot throughout the day and you're not always around a charger, you will definitely notice it's not really the best despite having a 4500 mAh battery. If you're really using it a lot throughout the day, the battery does drain pretty quickly, whereas with the A14, it will last for quite a bit longer. So while if you're really heavily using your phone, you might want the S21 FE just for the processing power, just keep in mind if the battery is more of a priority for you. Again, the A14 will have an advantage. For the software, both phones have Android 13, and with Samsung software support, with either of them, you can expect several other major updates in the future. With the A14, this phone will be getting Android 14, 15, 16, and 17, and with the S21 FE, it'll be getting Android 14, 15, and 16. So if you want that extra update, the A14 will have an advantage, but honestly with this phone especially, I don't imagine a lot of people are going to be getting a super low-end phone and keeping it for like 4 or 5 years. Whereas with the S21 FE being more of a higher-end device, I could imagine keeping this phone for a bit longer. But in general, if you're only really planning on keeping your phone for a couple years anyway, the difference is really not going to matter. But if you do want one extra update, the A14 will have an advantage. When it comes to other features, unfortunately the A14 does not have NFC, but the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE does. So if you like to use tap and pay, the S21 FE will have an advantage. But on the other hand, unfortunately this phone does not have a headphone jack, whereas the A14 does. So if you have a normal pair of 3.5mm headphones you want to use, and you don't want to get an adapter, the A14 will have an advantage there. But in conclusion, who is going to be better off with which phone? Now overall, it kind of goes without saying that with the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, in every way except for the battery, display size, and being about a year older, the S21 FE is a significantly better device. And if you're really going to be using your phone a lot for various different activities, from stuff like taking photos, recording videos, to doing more demanding activities like mobile gaming and stuff like video editing, if you really want a nice phone that's going to be good enough for pretty much anything you can think of, the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE will be a great choice. And honestly, even comparing it to other phones like it, I feel like it is one of the better options considering at this point in 2023, the S21 FE, despite originally going for around $600 or $700, can be easily found in the US at least for around $300 or $400, so for what it is, definitely a really affordable option. That being said though, despite having really good performance, a great camera, and some higher end features in general, not everyone is really going to need all this. And in that case, if you're really just looking for a more basic, affordable device, maybe you're really just watching the occasional YouTube video, listening to music, and just using the phone as a phone. In that case, even though it is pretty affordable for what it is, I still feel like the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE, if you're not going to be using all the features, is probably just not worth it. And if you are really just looking for a more basic device, the A14 will be a much better choice. But this concludes my comparison between the Samsung Galaxy A14 4G and the Samsung Galaxy S21 FE. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipus Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.